Good morning and welcome. I'm Ross Cattell, and I'm honored by the appointment to serve as Bryant University's 9th president. I am very much looking forward to officially getting started as president of Bryant on July 1st. For over 150 years, Bryant has delivered innovative programs that address the emerging needs of our students, industry, and society. That culture of continuous improvement and innovation is a powerful asset to us now more than ever. On behalf of everyone at Bryant University and the Rhode Island Foundation, I would like to thank you for joining us on this third panel in the series of 3 virtual sessions on pandemic economics. What does it mean for Rhode Island? The focus for today's third panel is jobs and sectorial changes in Rhode Island. We are extremely pleased and proud to convene this distinguished group of experts to share their perspectives and guidance as we all navigate through the difficult challenges we face due to the coronavirus pandemic. We have a lot to cover. So I'm going to get started by introducing our moderator for today, Bryant faculty moderator, John Kostova. John is an award-winning veteran journalist who worked for 29 years at the Providence Journal, including 19 years as the journal's business editor. His work has earned him awards, including from the New England Associated Press News Executive Association and the Society of American Business Writers and Educators. He is a graduate of the College of the Holy Cross, and we're very fortunate to have John as an adjunct faculty professor at Bryant University who teaches writing to our first-year students. Our students are very fortunate to benefit from his experience, expertise, and wisdom. And I'm sure we're going to be benefiting from John's expertise and experience today. So thank you, John, for being our moderator today. And let's begin today's panel.
Thank you, Dr. Cattell, and welcome to our audience. Thank you all for participating in our forum. It's my pleasure to moderate the third in our series of panel discussions on pandemic economics, what it means for Rhode Island. The objective is to help Rhode Islanders better understand the impact of COVID-19 on the economy and how leaders can find solutions that then they can use to craft public and private policy responses. Our first panel focused on strategic leadership, our second on public finances. Those two lead us nicely to our panel today, jobs and sectoral changes to Rhode Island's economy. For our discussion today, here's the format that we'll use. First, I'll introduce the panelists, then they'll answer a series of questions on a variety of issues. There will be an opportunity for the audience to ask questions. If they'd like to do that, please use the chat box on the bottom of the Zoom screen. We'll gather those questions, they'll be forwarded to me, and then I'll ask them of the panelists. And then we'll finish up with a closing from Dr. Cattell. Okay, let's get started. We have assembled a panel of 4 distinguished and accomplished Rhode Island leaders. I'll introduce each of them with a brief bio. There are more extensive bios on the Bryant website. First, Scott Jensen is director of the Rhode Island Department of Labor and Training. He leads Governor Raimondo's skills agenda, designed to give Rhode Islanders the tools to succeed in the 21st century economy. Jensen previously served as Deputy Secretary of the Maryland Department of Labor, of Licensing and Regulation. He holds a BA in History from Illinois State and a Master of Arts in Liberal Education from St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland. Dr. Edinaldo Tebaldi is a professor of economics at Bryant University and a member of the Council of Economic Advisors to the Governor of Rhode Island. He previously served as an economist for the World Bank and as an advisor for the New England Public Policy Center of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. He has extensive experience in econometric methods, policy analysis, and economic impact assessment. Dr. Tebaldi earned his PhD at the University of New Hampshire and his MA at Federal University of Ceará, Brazil. Lori White has been president of the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce since 2005. The chamber is devoted to growing the state's innovation economy through advanced industry formation, entrepreneurship, medical, academic, and industry collaboration, technology transfer, talent recruitment, and competitive tax policy. White previously served as executive counselor to the governor and as public information officer at the Department of Economic Development. She is a graduate of the University of Rhode Island with a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism. And Dale Venturiti is president and CEO of the Rhode Island Hospitality Association and the Rhode Island Hospitality Education Foundation. A veteran of more than 30 years in the hospitality industry, Venturini is considered by many to be the voice of the industry in Rhode Island. She has been instrumental in improving the industry's educational and training programs and enhancing the bottom line of the businesses she represents. She is a commissioner of the Rhode Island Convention Center Authority and a board member of the Council of State Restaurant Associations in Washington, D.C. With that, let's start with some questions. And we'll begin with Scott Jensen. Director Jensen, you and your staff analyzed the monthly labor market data in Rhode Island. What are your most important findings from the most recent data? Can you explain how this downturn differs from the 2007-2009 recession?
Sure, thanks. And really thanks for having me. And it's really an honor to be before everybody at Bryant University and with such a distinguished group. I would characterize the difference by saying that on one hand, much different, and on the other hand, unfortunately, similar. And let me explain that quickly. The way it's different is this bout with joblessness has been unlike any other because the economy was ordered closed. You know, there is no comparable event in the recession or really anything else. So what we've seen is just an incredible waterfall of people losing jobs. And I think, you know, we'll talk about it some more, but it'll be very, very interesting to see how things come back, and we're all hopeful. So where, however, it is similar is, I would say, who is being laid off. I want to give you just one very, very compelling stat, which is that if you, I'm trying to find it. Oh, here you go. Of the PUA claims, these are claims that are for the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, which is a brand new program that was launched during the COVID-19 crisis that allows people, gig workers and small business owners, to be able to get unemployment insurance for the first time. If you looked at the educational breakdown of who was getting that kind of assistance, or who is right now getting that kind of assistance, 43% of claimants have a high school diploma or less. 29% of claimants have some kind of post-secondary education, but not up to the level of a college degree. And then when you get to folks with an associate's degree, the rate is only 7%. And then when you're getting to people with bachelor's degrees or more, you're at a much lower rate, 15% for people with bachelor's degrees, and only 6% unemployment for people with a master's degree or higher. And that 6%, while, you know, our rate was in the 4s before, it seems like such a long time ago, but that 6% is comparable with where we were before. So the similarity, we saw similar patterns in the Great Recession around the country. And the bottom line is, if you're not skilled, and again, we all know that skills that are valuable in the economy go past only having a degree, but with a proxy, with a degree being a proxy for skilled, entrance in the job market, you are much, much, much more vulnerable to a downturn like this. So, I think that's an unfortunate similarity, and is what, I think we all need to work on.
Thank you, Scott, for that very detailed overview. Appreciate it. Let's turn to Dale Venturini. Dale, your industry, leisure and hospitality, has been among the hardest hit, with job losses approaching 40,000 workers since March. Dale, what are the biggest obstacles for those business? What do they have to overcome to stay afloat and rehire their workers?
Dale, you are muted.
Goodness, hard to mute me too. For the industry that I represent, we have about 86,000 employees. That would be the lodging, food service, restaurant, and tourism economies. So we're at more than half, actually, as we see going forward, of unemployed people. A couple of things have happened. As the governor has opened up the economy in the last couple of weeks, we've seen people being hired back, thankfully. Quite frankly, I've seen more help wanted ads than I've seen in a long time with getting folks back. It has been a little bit of a challenge. And I totally empathize with Scott, because I get not as many calls as he gets, but people call us trying to figure out how to get through the DLT system because of some of the challenges that have gone forth. But also, with the new $600 added onto their unemployment, there are some folks that have chosen not to come back into the workforce right now. And I hate to say it, but that's been the truth. And I've been working very closely with DLT on that. Thankfully, all of us have such a great relationship that we can bounce things off and try to figure out this pandemic that has no playbook to it. So the challenges are, number one, we've got to convince our customer that it's safe to come back. Number two, we've got to get our employees back in and retrained. And again, thankfully, with Real Jobs Rhode Island, we've already been doing training. I'm very fortunate to be part of the National Restaurant Association, which I have served on the board for many years. And luckily, we have the chairman of the board from Rhode Island next year. First time ever in the history of the 100 years of the National Restaurant Association. We have Brian Casey from North Kingstown, who owns Oak Hill Tavern, as the chairman of the board of the National Restaurant Association. And I work with the American Hotel and Lodging. So we have had so many resources that we got together with our national and provided free training, free upskilling, free food safety training, customer service training, every aspect of it. I have a list of the amounts of training that we've been able to offer for free. And going forward, we're planning on increasing that. Right now, I have a staff member out doing more food safety training. Critical, very critical. Even though by law, we're mandated already, have been since the 90s, where we helped write the law to have managers of food safety on duty at all times. We are upping that game substantially. And actually, you as a customer are going to see more of that. Even though we always like to keep the suspense and, coming to eat, you shouldn't have to worry about those kinds of things. I think today we need to show you all the things that we've been doing anyway, but we're times 10, 15, 20, whatever it is and whatever's necessary.
Thank you, Dale. It's a very good description of your industry at this point. We appreciate it. Lori White, you are the president of the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber is the biggest business organization in Rhode Island, with many businesses of many sizes. What are you hearing from your constituents about the impact of COVID-19 on productivity, especially for businesses that allow for employees to work from home versus those that requires workers to be on site?
Thank you, John, and good morning, everybody. The issue of working from home is obviously a complicated one, and the answer is it depends. And what we've heard from our members is that there is a great deal of willingness to work from home, and the productivity has been very satisfactory. The caveat is that there are certain conditions that are making it very difficult for people to work from home, which is why I say it depends. So first of all, it depends on the structure of the household unit, and those that don't have childcare and those that are, working and helping their children on remote learning. That's a handful for a lot of people, and they're learning to, be able to juggle lots of duties, but it's blurring the line where there's not a lot of boundary between work time and leisure time and taking care of the children and the rest of the family. So it all is becoming very blurred, but overall, a lot of satisfaction with working from home, and certainly the notion that this work from home culture is going to be with us for a very long time. But secondly, I wanted to focus on a couple of the inequities around working from home. And that is, according to the Economic Progress Institute, less than 1 in 5 Black workers and roughly 1 in 6 Hispanic workers are able to work from home, given the types of jobs that they have. So that's an inequity that persists, and we must be mindful of. And in terms of the industries where people are, it's most conducive to be able to work from home, as you might expect, higher wage workers are 6 times as likely to be able to work from home than lower wage workers. So industries, specific industries that lend themselves to a work at home culture, like financial services, business and professional services, those are at the top of the list. But as you work your way into other industries that are more customer facing, whether it be the leisure industry, certain retail, transportation, utilities, wholesale and retail trade, healthcare, construction, these are industries that do not readily allow themselves to work from home given the nature of the particular job. So we must be mindful that there's 2 cultures in the work from home culture.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you very much for that explanation. Let's move on to Dr. Tebaldi. Dr. Tebaldi, the panelists have described, and the data shows, Rhode Island is suffering through a significant economic downturn. Is it too soon to talk about an economic recovery? And if so, will the recovery look like the one that followed the 2007-2009 Great Recession? What do you think, Dr. Tebaldi?
Thank you very much, John, for the nice introduction at the beginning. And I also want to thank my colleagues, Cecilia Cooper and Liz O'Neill, who have done an amazing job behind the scenes, as well as the AV team. To answer this question, I want to share something with you. There is a big discussion about how the economic recovery will take place, what's the shape, when it will start. Very hard to answer that question right now, given the information that we have and given that the COVID-19 crisis is not averted yet. But we have a few ideas about it. Some people believe that perhaps for the U.S. economy could take a V shape. Others will disagree and expect other shapes, including perhaps a permanent drop in economic activity that could take us to, let's say, the L-shaped function or the square root shaped function that you see in these slides. If you think about what happened to Rhode Island last time during the 2008-9 Great Recession, it followed what I call a check mark type of recovery, where we had a very steep downturn, and then it took a decade to fully recover from that recession. So to think about where we go from here, we have to think about what is unique at this time. And we have first a fundamental shift in consumer behavior that was highlighted in previous discussions in these panels. as well as structural problems in our economy, where we have a high proportion of the jobs highly concentrated in a few sectors. For instance, about 72% of the private employment is in health services, professional business services, retail and wholesale, leisure and hospitality, and manufacturing. So the future of those five super sectors, you basically shape the nature of the economic recovery. And here is the problem that we face. I mean, this chart shows an index of job creation going back to 2010, just the beginning of the recovery, and then the downturn in March and April. So what we expect right now is a change in consumer behavior towards online shopping. If that happens, so we'll likely see the demise of retail businesses that were already struggling before the COVID-19 crisis, and they will shut down. So JCPenney, for instance, is one example, and many other retail businesses may not, again, survive this time. Thus, the impact of the pandemic on local retail trade will likely be long-lasting, and job creation will likely be slow in this sector, possibly not returning to pre-pandemic levels in a very long time. The second sector that is important is manufacturing, and in this very important, unique sector, we have seen job losses over the last 3 decades. The chart also shows that we have seen job losses in manufacturing over the last 2 years. So we will likely not see job creation taking place in manufacturing to the degree that we need to employ the people who lose jobs right now. So jobs you have to be created in other sectors of the economy. Going back to leisure and hospitality, another very important sector, here we saw very large job losses. And again, the change in consumer behavior may not allow us to go back to pre-pandemic levels anytime soon. So we may reopen, but the question is, will consumers be back? And we don't know the answer to that question yet. So again, we may not see a full recovery in leisure and hospitality for a long period of time. The only good news that I have about this particular sector is the working population is relatively young. About 60% of the workforce in leisure and hospitality, they are 34 years or younger. That means they could be absorbed by other sectors of the economy if education and training were offered to this particular cohort of the labor force. The other two important sectors for us to highlight is health services. It's one of the most resilient sectors of our economy. We also saw job losses there, but unfortunately, people are still getting sick, and this sector or the demand for health services is still there, and the jobs will likely come back in the near term. Professional and business services, which was the most important and fastest industry to recover from the 2008-2009 recession, also lost jobs. And they will likely see some aftershocks due to the contraction in economic activity in other sectors. But this sector has a great capability to innovate and recreate jobs, so there are opportunities for job creation. So to sum it up, from 5 major sectors in our economy, only 2 are well positioned to create jobs in the near term. So if this is the case, we may actually go to a situation where the economic recovery may look like a figure E. I call that the square root shape, where we may have some permanent loss of economic activity moving forward. And that's not the best path moving forward. $1 billion question here is, how can we avoid it? What can we do at this point so we don't face these square root shape recovery, but we may perhaps think of a U-shape or a V-shape recovery? In the 2 previous panels, we had a lot of conversations about that. I just want to highlight a few things. We need to acknowledge, I think, 2 fundamental principles. The first one is we have to make investments in capabilities and focus on diversifying the employment basis. The second one is we need to acknowledge that long-term economic performance is based on 3 fundamental ingredients. That's education, that takes the form of human capital, infrastructure, and technical innovation. The problem for us is we have to have a long-term commitment on those three dimensions to see outcomes. The role of education is pretty obvious, and again, others have been talking about that. I want to highlight a problem that we have faced, not today, not over the last year, but over the last 3 decades. It's infrastructure. We have made significant improvements in investments in infrastructure over the last few years, but there is a very large gap, and we have to do more to catch up. Because again, we have been underinvesting for 3 to 4 decades. And cities and towns in Rhode Island, they have to step up. They are not investing enough to modernize their infrastructure. So if there is a key takeaway from this conversation is we need to improve our infrastructure capability. The last piece of my remarks is about innovation. My colleague Gary Sass highlighted on the panel on the 27th that we have a productivity problem in Rhode Island, and I agree with him. To fix that, we need to leverage innovation. Early in January, the Commerce RI released the Rhode Island Innovates 2.0. It's a phenomenal step towards promoting innovation, but we have to do more on that front. We have to find ways to empower people to innovate in Rhode Island. And one actually final remark, Rhode Island is very small as a state, but we have major differences in capabilities and infrastructure and human capital between the southern and northern counties in the state or cities. So we certainly need to think about that, the differences in capabilities across regions within Rhode Island, and build on partnerships to address that potential problem, specifically in cities like Woonsocket, Pawtucket, and Central Falls. So thank you, John.
That was an excellent analysis, Dr. Tebaldi. Thank you very much, and also for the solutions you suggested as well. Again, thank you. Let's move on to a second round of questions for our panelists. And this time I may ask some follow-up questions once we get through your initial responses, just to see where the conversation leads us. So back to Director Jensen. You heard both Dale and Dr. Tebaldi talk about the segments that have really been hit pretty hard. I know Rhode Island has a number of job training programs already. With the large budget deficits faced by the state now and in the future, Scott, how will training programs be affected? And do they need to be revised in the new economy to support the recovery?
Sorry about that. So on the budget question, you know, I think that when you look at the stimulus that Congress has provided through the CARES Act and other sources, you know, it's clear the path forward, you know, from, given the economic analysis we've just heard, which is we need to invest in human capital to bring ourselves out of this recession, largely because it's people who are going to be doing the innovating. So, you know, I think that we'll see the governor make a pretty substantial investment in Rhode Island's people in order to bring us out of the, bring us out of the recession that we're in right now. I think how our job training programs need to be modified in order to deal with the new situation, I think there's good news there. I think that we have spent, Dale mentioned real jobs, and Lori White was instrumental in helping incubate and being a thought leader on skills for Rhode Island's future. We've put in a lot of infrastructure that makes our job training efforts in Rhode Island be really two things. Demand driven is number one. You know, it does not do anybody any good to train a person for a job that does not exist. You really can't underestimate that. But not only that, it doesn't do any good to train somebody for a job that exists if we don't have a way to make the connection. So interesting that you pointed out about the southern counties of Rhode Island. I'd observe, as not being a native Rhode Islander, that it isn't very far from the southern counties up to the northern counties. But if you don't know what opportunities are in the economy and you can't get there, it might as well be across the country. So we will be investing in things like Skills for Rhode Island's Future, which does the hard work of talking to companies, finding out what kind of folks they're looking for, what kind of training those companies need, and does a good job of figuring out where folks are and how we need to support them to get them to the jobs that they're gonna innovate in. Let's, I think, be real clear about it. Given we all have different strengths, and if we can put people who have the right kind of strengths and the right kind of skills in industries where those skills can be really made use of, that's how we're going to make the many small innovations in practical ways that are going to give our Rhode Island companies the practical advantages in the marketplace that they're going to need to survive and thrive. So I think job training is a big deal. I think we have a really good start, and I think that we'll be investing in Rhode Island's future coming out of this recession as a stimulus.
Thank you for that explanation, Scott. Very good, very complete. Thank you. Let's turn back to Dale Venturini. Dale, you touched in your opening remarks the idea of confidence, and my question is, some consumers still seem to lack the confidence that restaurants, hotels, or vacation spots are safe, and also some owners are also reluctant to reopen because of those same concerns. What's the best way to restore that confidence?
Our association has always practiced a culture of community because we are part of the community. The industry is very much part of the community, and part of that community and culture means cooperation, collaboration, connection, and curiosity. The most important one is communication. And I say that and I highlight it. Communication and collaboration is key for us to get the general public to understand all the practices that we're putting in place. We came up with a restaurant pledge that is both on the customer side, and we also have a lodging pledge as well, but I know we're focusing on the restaurant side right now. But the lodging pledge does all the same things, and it's a partnership and collaboration with not only us in the industry, but also the general public, because we have to put some onus back on the general public in order for them to come into our establishments. And you hear it in the governor's remarks every single day about washing your hands, don't come out if you're sick. Every day she talks about those same things. And we have to ensure the same thing when people come into our establishments. I think that both of the communication and collaboration are critical. But not only that, we have to have partnerships. We have a symbiotic relationship now with all of our regulatory agencies. I know that the Department of Labor and Training, we're on the phone with someone from there pretty much every day, sometimes more than that. We have to have our public health leaders, our governor's office, Commerce RI. I'm literally on the phone with them hour by hour. Department of Environmental Management. Then we have to have the businesses and our customers. So it's really this symbiotic relationship for everyone in order to make people feel safe to come back into any establishment, but ours in particular. And as I said earlier, I have a lot of toolkits that we prepared for our members, so they didn't have to go in 5 or 10 different places to get all of the information that they need to reopen. Even my national has come up with many tools. So we have a lot of resources that we literally walk our members through. And we have a morning staff meeting, and someone said this morning, we offer concierge services. So as much as we send all of these things out, and we have a lot of them here on my desk, people want to know how it affects them and them alone. And that's the most interesting part. And that's why I go back to that communication and collaboration. It's critical, but it includes the customer. They have to be part of this.
Dale, I have one follow-up question. So one thing owners seem to be concerned about is liability if either a worker comes in or a worker becomes ill. Have you heard that concern, and do you have a suggestion of how that should be answered? What's the solution to that question?
Wow, if I had that one, boy. That's a great one because, you know, I have a full-time attorney on staff, and that's the question we ask every day. We talk about it on every single one of our town halls, which we do several times a week with our members in different factions of our industry. Liability is of great concern. We have to follow a lot of laws, ADA when it with regard to masks. You know, there's so many layers of responsibility that we have as the consuming public comes into our places. But liability is something that we are working on the federal level, and as well we will be working on a local level. But both my national organizations have put in legislation on a federal level and actually working together on the same legislation from the hotel and the restaurant side, because it is critical. It is critical for us to understand when we do X, what's the effect going to be following. So it's a conversation that's being had pretty much daily, and it's trying to figure out what that all means. Part of our, the way we structure our board of directors, we have a CPA on our board of directors. We have an insurance, one of the largest insurance agencies on our board of directors, amongst others. And the reason we do that is so this conversation can always be happening when we make a decision to do one thing, what's the trickle down on the rest of the story, so to speak. So when I come back with that one, any help I'll take, but liability is top of mind. Yeah,
Tough problem to solve. Thank you very much, Dale. Let's move on to Lori. Lori, again, as president of the chamber, you have a unique perspective because of the large number of businesses, large and small, that you represent around the state. Here's a multiple part question. What are the biggest challenges, especially for our small business community? And what are the greatest needs right now for the leaders of those companies and the employees of those businesses?
That's a great question. So we've talked about various C's. We've talked about consumer confidence being necessary. We've talked about communication and collaboration, as Dale just pointed out. But I'd throw another C on the table, and that's cash flow. And there are issues with cash flow particularly for small businesses. And I've seen statistics from FEMA that 60% of small businesses never are able to recover from a disaster. And this is certainly a disaster. So I would say that the issue of thinly capitalized small businesses is a major concern. And I think it became very evident in the early days of this crisis and the need for the Paycheck Protection Program and other federal stimulus programs to keep a lot of these businesses going during the hiatus, if you will, when there were no customers. Secondly, in terms of other pain points for businesses, I think it's around talent recruitment, talent retention. And companies are finding that, depending on the industry, of course, that people are reticent to come back for any number of reasons. So whether it be the additional unemployment insurance benefits that they're receiving, or whether general unease about the safety of working outside of the home and returning to the office and the complexity of that. So having people actually be able to be deployed within your company or organization is a big issue. And Director Jensen mentioned skills for Rhode Island's future and the types of entities that are looking to hire right now. And because they have the pain point of not being able to get the talent, they are reaching out to various groups and stakeholders and resources in the community to be able to source workers to come back. So it's on a temp service model initially. And I talked to Nina Pandey, who runs Skills, just a few moments before our panel started, just so I could get the latest information. But she tells me that right now there's great demand for CNAs, RNs, and LPNs for obvious reasons in the medical profession, and that these professions are paying surge wages. On top of the very competitive wages for those industries, on top of that, surge wages in order to bring folks back into the workforce to provide those services, particularly in nursing homes and in group homes. Those are a couple of sectors that are really feeling the pain point at this moment. Also, manufacturing, there's always a great demand for manufacturing, particularly those manufacturers that are making PPE products. And we were able to, at the chamber, able to take a virtual tour, if you will, of the new Honeywell plant in Smithfield, where they're making millions and millions of masks, face masks a day, as part of the Federal Reserve stockpile. So that was a very interesting conversation with the folks there. So manufacturing, particularly those that are putting forth products in the medical profession, they are looking for workers. Food and hospitality, again, Dale mentioned the challenge of having some returning workers come in because it is a face-to-face customer-facing industry. So there's a demand for workers for that sector. And there are some call center jobs that are seeing an uptick in hiring, and that might even be call center jobs from work from home, but also in office type of situations. And then you see grocery stores, essential retailers like CVS and other essential entities that have not been closed during this pandemic that are continually looking to hire, and delivery type jobs, transportation type jobs. So those are just a couple of examples of pain points for the membership. And again, as I said at the very beginning, it all depends. It depends on your level of capitalization, and it also depends on the industry that you represent.
That's a good snapshot, Lori, of where the business community stands right now. Let me just add a quick follow-up, and I think you touched on a couple of these areas. As the crisis evolves and we start to move towards recovery, how will the needs of some of the business owners and leaders change, and what will they need to continue that recovery to keep moving? And then where do you see those opportunities as we move on out for growth, especially for job growth in the future?
I think it's all around education. Huge opportunities in training, I believe, to get people reoriented to, I won't even say it's a new normal, because I don't even think that we've arrived at what the new normal is. So the new normal continues to evolve, but as of this moment, being able to offer the agility and the creativity, and as Dr. Tebaldi mentioned, being able to innovate and take a look at your own business and see how the consumer demand is impacting your own industry. And you have to take a very hard look at what you're doing, and to really think clearly about where the consumer is headed, where your customer is headed, where their mindsets might be. So the ability to be flexible and to have a penchant or a desire, or really an interest in learning new ways of communication and new technologies to be able to talk to your customers and interact with your customers and meet them where they are, I think is a huge opportunity.
Thank you, Lori. Dr. Tebaldi, when you discussed some of the investments before the Rhode Island needs to make, or suggestions for solutions, I think you mentioned infrastructure possibilities, both at the local and the state level. That often comes down to a question of who pays for that. Where does the money come from to make those investments? Do you have any thoughts about that as far as how that infrastructure investment is made?
That's a very good question. Of course, that's not an easy question to answer. But the first thing that should come to mind is you have to set priorities. So if investment in infrastructure is important, not only for what's going to happen to us today, but long-term economic performance, it has to be at the top of the list when you make decisions about investing money. So we may have to reallocate resources from other buckets towards infrastructure. We can also look for other options. There are grants at the federal level. We can establish partnerships with the private sector, with the state government. And I mean, cities and towns, they have to be creative in looking for those opportunities. We could also look into what we have done over time that may have worked or may not have worked. For instance, it's pretty hard to build new houses in Rhode Island in general because of regulations, especially for construction or housing development. And there is also a discussion about population. People is very important to us, as all of the people in this panel have alluded to, but we have a problem with population growth to start with. So perhaps the lack of housing is constraining not only our ability to raise revenues, but also constraining our ability to bring people. And so we should look into housing development, how to streamline that particular segment of local cities and towns regulations to perhaps allow us to bring more people, more housing development, more tax revenues. And finally, I would not be shy to say right now, the cost of money is very low. It's cheap to borrow right now. We have to of course, make the right decision, the right call on that front. But I would not be afraid of borrowing money to invest in infrastructure, specifically, for instance, to improve our capability to educate our population or facilitate transportation. All of that would make businesses more efficient, more productive, and help our economy down the road.
Very good, Doctor. Thank you. Lori White just mentioned, Doctor, education and the importance. And of course, public education seemed to be the priority before the pandemic hit. I was wondering what your thoughts might be on the importance of public education at all levels, grammar school as well as high school, on Rhode Island's recovery and its ability to sort of build a new economy in the future.
Well, again, it started with the first panel, May 7th, where we highlighted, and Neil Stenberg made a very good point that education is the key for us to move forward. Lori talked today about the inequalities that we face. Scott Jensen did the same, highlighting that a particular segment of the population is more affected, and the key reason seems to be education. What we need is a concerted effort that we build on our capabilities, both the public school system as well as the private school system. So how can universities, including mine, Bryant, can partner with public schools to help think about innovation? How can we develop a curriculum where we can expose middle school students, high school students to a mindset where innovation is a key component? How can we get them to think about business development? We can also think about how to leverage what our community college does to prepare a segment of our population who may not be interested in pursuing a four-year college degree, but they may need that technical education, that vocational training that's going to give them the opportunity to find a good job, a good high-paying job. So I think the key point here is, again, making the investments in infrastructure. That's key. We need better schools. And to get there, we need more money, but also have to think about how we partner among ourselves with the private sector, higher education institutions, and our schools across the state.
Thank you, Doctor. Just a reminder to our audience, if you do have a question you'd like to ask the panelists, please use the chat box at the bottom to type your question in, and they'll be funneled over to me. A couple of questions pop up when I've been listening to all the panelists just now. And when Dr. Tebaldi mentioned Neil Steinberg from the Rhode Island Foundation, Neil had talked about in the first panel that we can't go back to the normal or even a new normal, but a better economy, a better Rhode Island. And I'd just like to ask, maybe start with Lori White. Lori, if we were looking 3 to 5 years out after we come out of this pandemic and start to rebuild the economy, what does that look like? What does the future look like for Rhode Island 3-5 years down the road? What are your thoughts, Lori?
Well, we have tremendous natural assets here in Rhode Island, given the abundance of higher education organizations, colleges, universities, very robust training programs. So the concept that we could deploy all of those forces and really, determining how to spread this recovery, this hopeful recovery across all ethnicities, across all wage areas, and to be able to, harness those industries that we're best at. And a lot of them do revolve around, financial services, and at all points within the spectrum of financial services. So we say financial services, but there are all points across that ladder that would be very much open to college graduates, or even those that are not specifically earmarking college. So information services, the opportunity to tap into the expanding infrastructure around alternative energy, particularly wind energy, where we have a natural competitive advantage, and also in general business services. I think one of the points that we talked about earlier, what are some of the points that are holding Rhode Island back that potentially will not allow us to have that future that Neil is talking about 3 to 5 years out, is the idea that opportunity isn't necessarily even and across the board. And even in those companies and in those industries that we thought were secure and highly, using high wage individuals, that the degree to which a lot of our companies are very thinly capitalized is a very scary thing. And that's the notion, that's one of the key findings that has struck me during the course of all this, that the degree to which, businesses, small businesses, and even, mid-sized businesses that you look at from the outside, and you believe that they have the wherewithal to be able to survive, a disaster, let alone a pandemic, but the fragility in which our entire business sector is sort of teetering, looking 3 to 5 years out, I don't know how you imagine that, but I think there's some real soul searching that, business owners need to do at this point to pivot. That word has become overused and whatnot, but, it's really essential, because the foundation of our economy is, smaller, mid-sized businesses, and the ability to innovate and to think it through and to think clearly is so very important. And 3 to 5 years out is a very, very, very long time. So again, uncertain.
Good, Lori, thank you. And we do have some questions coming in that seems to raise some interest. Let's go to Dale Venturini. Dale, it's a similar question. Some analysts have said your industry is going to have to restructure pretty dramatically, and there may be some significant job losses. Dale, what do you think? 3 to 5 years down the road, what does Rhode Island's leisure, hospitality, vacation, tourism look like? What are your thoughts about how Rhode Island escapes from the recession and recovers?
I think it's a multi-step facet. I think that we're looking in increments of 6 months, not 3 to 5 years yet. We're looking at what does the next 6 months look like, and how are we going to adapt to what is going on right now. This is a defining moment in our lifetime. We're writing this playbook as we go. I think the good thing that has come out of all of this is this ability to communicate. Sometimes I'm on way too many Zoom calls, but this ability to communicate, we're talking to each other a lot more than we ever did, because we can't see each other in person, and we're hungry for that peopleness, so to speak. But I think there's a lot of smart people out there that can put together plans to move forward incrementally. I just don't see how I could answer 3 to 5 years. Lori said something that's very, very important, is our natural assets are so phenomenal. It's about figuring out how we're going to use them best. We work with marine trades. We work with all sorts of organizations. I don't feel that Rhode Island has silos like other states may have. I think that we cross-pollinate with so many different industries. And, I just even look at my industry when a community is just building up. The first thing they want there, they call me, can you get a restaurant to move in here? Because if a restaurant moves in, people will come, and then other businesses will follow suit, because it brings that safety factor of involving the community. So 3 to 5 years is a little beyond my reach. I'm doing 6 months incrementally, and then looking out to, that year, and of course up to 3 years, I think is critical. I've worked for a very interesting group, especially on the restaurant side. They're entrepreneurial. They they don't like to be told they can't do something. I'll tell you that. When they face adversity head on, not afraid to jump in and look at ways to change. I've watched it happen in this last 3 months. I watched them turn around their business model painfully, and also again, the need for cash flow to do just that. But I've watched it happen, and I have a lot of faith and confidence in what I see going forward, just because of that ability to be flexible. People just feel this. So much is feasible if they can be flexible. And the last thing on that end is people are competitive, and they've always been competitive, but in my history here in the association is watching that collaboration, a critical part of our culture. And I've seen it more and more. I've seen people talk to one another about how did you do this? How did you do that? Something that you might not have seen 3 months ago, 4 months ago. They're really, really sharing a lot. And I think that's what's going to get us out of this, the uniqueness of Rhode Island, the closeness of us being able to talk to each other with one phone call. And even now sit in a Zoom meeting or hopefully in a regular meeting in a hotel so we can give them some love. We're going to figure this out. It's going to be painful, but we're going to figure it out.
Dale, that collaboration you mentioned does seem to be key. A lot of people mention it all the time, especially in a place like Rhode Island, which is a small place and you get things done. So I think important, good point. I'd like to bounce the question over to Scott. Scott, again, you keep very close track to all those job categories, from health service workers to leisure and hospitality to manufacturing to financial services. Scott, as we come out of this and we recover, do you see those job categories changing somewhere down the line? And if so, how do you think they might change in the future?
Well, I think that, even before the COVID-19 crisis, we were really beginning to see with some clarity, and the we in that sentence is those of us who are working together on job training, from business groups like Lori and Dale's to working with President Hughes and the community college and others. That Rhode Island really, when it comes to technology especially, is the front office to the Northeast. Those business services that Ed's slide showed reflect that. And I would include in that sort of broad category some of the call center work that we all know about, Amica, Citizens Bank, CVS, many, many others. But also there's really important work to be done on bringing those kinds of industries to, bringing them into the cutting edge of the 21st century, where we're deploying data analytics, AI, things like that, and we're creating the skill sets of folks, of employees who know their way around those kinds of technologies, can work with managers and business owners to implement really cutting edge solutions to some of the businesses that we have going on. We are going to we're always going to have a big healthcare sector. That is true of every single state and every region in the country. We, to Lori and Dale's very eloquent points, have such an advantage when it comes to hospitality and tourism. We are going to see that come back. It is a very tough time for thinly capitalized, Lori, to use your perfect characterization, for folks to weather this particular crisis. But if there's demand, we're going to see that industry grow because people are entrepreneurial in Rhode Island. But it's going to be keeping manufacturing strong. As while we haven't seen giant growth, I think a lot of that, and I defer to Ed about how much of that is due to productivity gains, because that's the name of the game in manufacturing. And, the more CNC machinists, the more of those kinds of talented folks that we can keep that sector strong and growing and healthy like it always has been in Rhode Island, but do even better in some of that front office work as companies are finding Boston, New York, and other places like that just too expensive, where you want to be in the Northeast, But if you can find talent and live in a great place like Rhode Island, I think that's our competitive advantage and our sweet spot down the road. And if we can just, you know, I don't know what the tipping point is, but I'm sure it's 20% growth in those sectors that then fuels the service industries, fuels our ability to go out for a great dinner at one of the amazing places that, you know, in Rhode Island. So again, I think it's focusing on those competitive value-added industries that are the rising tide that's going to float the boats.
Yeah, excellent point, Scott, on those competitive industries for the future. And you talked about productivity as well, which is what Lori talked about early on. Lori, I think you want to make one more point based on my previous question. Lori, do you want to jump back in?
Yeah, I wanted to also talk about manufacturing and the obvious nature of the vulnerability of the American supply chain that became so very evident during this. And I think you'll see a lot of reshoring of product because in the United States, people saw that the ability to get product out of other places was severely compromised. And the idea that we had to source face masks from China and other places, and there was a significant amount of delay in terms of getting that product imported back into the United States. So I do believe that there's a very strong play for manufacturers to see an on-sourcing, reshoring of product and being able to, shore up the supply chain in a way that we haven't seen. And agile manufacturing and other things where we've seen evidence of manufacturers being able to turn on a dime, if you will, and go from making XYZ product to ABC product to respond almost immediately to either the consumer demand or the need for medical and PPE, other equipment as put out by the federal government demonstrates that manufacturing is very, very strong. And we know that across the board, manufacturing is a great place for all types of skills levels to plug in. So I would say watch for a good opportunity there too.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Lori. And another question just popped in from our audience. I think we'd like to get to. This is actually for you, Dr. Tebaldi. And the question is, as we start to recover, how does Rhode Island state government reinvent itself to adopt to what we all think will be a new economy, something different? The questioner says Rhode Island is a state heavily overregulated and stifles innovation. So how does that change to really help growth and industry growth in the future?
That's a very good question. Very hard to answer. I think the state has been reinventing itself over the last few years under Governor Raimondo with big improvements in several areas. We have the I-195 district or innovation district. The name keeps changing. That's, I think, a phenomenal initiative on the innovation side. I think we should not miss this crisis in terms of pushing for what are our priorities. And the legislature has also to provide the support, including the resources needed to accomplish that. And to do that, they need to first understand what, again, are our priorities. And this panel has made it very clear. We have a productivity problem. Everybody talked about that. We have an education problem. Everybody talked about that. We may have a regulation problem, even though we have made huge improvements in many areas. There is more to be done on that front. I highlighted housing. I think we have to look very closely to our policy about land development across the state. We have to think about the role of housing as part of our strategy for economic development. And again, this is the time to look into that. So I think the point I'm trying to make is we need to get both the legislature and all of those who are thinking about policies moving forward to think about what are our priorities and then put the resource behind it.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tebaldi, for that very thoughtful answer. Thank you very much. At this point of our discussion, I'd like to invite Dr. Gattel to return Just to answer a couple of questions before we finish up. Dr. Gattell, our focus has been on the pandemic and its impact on the economy, but even before the pandemic, the economy and the labor markets were changing due to new technologies, especially the development of artificial intelligence. Some analysts suggest the pandemics will accelerate that trend. What's Bryant University's role in educating students for those new technologies, for those new opportunities in a new economy?
Yeah, well, thank you, John, and thank you to all the panelists for this great, very informative session. You know, Bryant Education is focused on a lot of the capabilities that the panelists talked about, capabilities that are needed in a very dynamic economy, a very dynamic and changing a society that's subject to contingencies, just like we're experiencing now, that we could never predict. And what's going to help us through this pandemic and to have a strong economy in Rhode Island is investment. I think Dr. Tebaldi emphasized it, but others spoke to it, is capabilities, human capital capabilities for success in the 21st century economy. And those capabilities help build the skills necessary to increase productivity and to enhance growth and expand opportunity for those who have those capabilities. And a Bryant Education is focused on a lot of the capabilities that were emphasized here. Capabilities such as core business finance skills. Talk about how do you manage a business? How do you ensure what Laurie and Dale mentioned, cash flow? When you're faced with contingencies, how do you do basic finance and accounting? And that's been a strength for over 150 years at Bryant. Also increasingly thinking about those skills necessary for collaboration and for success in the 21st century specifically. And a lot of our education is now focused around design thinking and innovation and having students engage in collaborative decision-making and problem solving, because that's what we're all doing now. And the businesses that come out of this in the hospitality industry, in manufacturing, in professional and business services, are those we have strong management teams that engage in collective collaborative problem solving and apply design thinking to try to address things in new ways that create new opportunities for their businesses and for a broader society. Also, you know, you spoke, John, about specific technological capabilities. So we're exposing our students in various ways to technologies, new technologies, and their application. So we think about artificial intelligence, data analytics, you know, the ability to analyze large data sets, which we're all doing and businesses are doing as we get new information about the pandemic, about its economic impact across different sectors of the economy. And what we're all learning in the range of issues we're dealing with, not only the economic issues, but the social and the political issues, is that we have to have the ability to think critically and to draw upon historical experience and apply different social science methods and ways of thinking across a broad range of issues that intersect with each other and affect business performance and outcomes for society. And Bryant Education emphasized these interdisciplinary aspects with a core, strong finance and business education, and then engaging student through the student life experience, through our pedagogy here in collaborative projects and in design thinking. And these apply across a broad range of industries. So increasingly our students are focused on industries that present opportunities for growth in New Hampshire and growth for them in their own careers. We talk about professional and business services. We talk about finance. Increasingly, those opportunities are going to be in a broad area, which I would refer to as a biological, behavioral, and health services. And we're going to need professionals in that area to help us address challenges we face and also to help us grow the economy. So the capabilities, the human capital capabilities for success for those individuals, but for success for businesses, for a state like Rhode Island, that's what we're focused on in Bryant. So we really focusing on those. There's a long tradition and a new emerging tradition on artificial intelligence and new capabilities here. But that innovative business education linked to the liberal arts and a strong student engagement foundation is really what Bryant University is all about. And Bryant is very much focused on contributing to help make Rhode Island a better place, particularly coming out of this, what's going to be a difficult economic time as described by our distinguished panelists.
Doctor, as we move towards wrapping up this session, I'd like to ask you, you've participated or seen all three panels now. What are your key takeaways from the discussions? What have we learned? And Doctor, where do we go from here?
Yeah, well, where do we go from here? You know, what we have learned and where do we go from here? I mean, these panelists were very articulate about what we learned. We learned about the importance of education and training our population to enable them to be resilient in difficult times such as these. And that helps, again, individuals, their families, the economy to have those core capabilities. I think, Scott, you got us started talking about, you know, those with associate degrees or higher, you know, do better in this economy. There's a lot of strong data in it. Lori and Dale emphasized, you know, the capabilities that people they work with in the business community in Providence and the hospitality industry throughout the state, what they need, you know, cash flow, critical. You know, how do you get out of this? The first thing you have to do is survive. And then once you survive, how do you implement and innovate to take advantage of the opportunities that are going to emerge when we get out of this pandemic situation? Because another thing we learned is at this stage and prior to this stage, what we have to focus on is public health. And the best economic solution is to focus on public health and the health and safety of all those in the state of Rhode Island. And the governor appropriately has focused on that. And now she could start opening the state so the hospitality businesses and other businesses could start recovering those jobs and start contributing to a strong economy. Where do we go from here? You know, there's a lot of different dimensions to it. I think there's a lot of follow-up suggested by these panelists about education and training to address what barriers there are, whether they're governmental and regulatory, whether they're individuals and family support services that we have to put in place. Addressing inequalities, that was a big theme that's come across. Rhode Island is going to be only as strong as the broad population has the capabilities and the resources to do well and help collectively to grow and stronger and position the Rhode Island economy for growth. What are we going to do here at Bryant University? We're going to continue these discussions. We're going to switch to a little different theme in the fall. And so working with faculty such as Edinaldo Tebaldi, working with industry leaders such as Dale and Lori in the government sectors, just as Scott, and continuing to work with the Rhode Island Foundation. And I want to thank Neil Steinberg and the Rhode Island Foundation for their generous support of this series. What we want to do is, arrange for a series of follow-up discussions about recovering from the pandemic, strategies for getting back to work into a better future, to follow up on a lot of the themes that we're focused on here and now, which include healthcare, finance, addressing inequality, and trying to think of ways to enhance Rhode Island's economic competitiveness moving forward. What we're going to do, since it's the fall and our students are coming back at Bryant, at each of those panels, we're going to have a student perspective, because we're only as strong in Rhode Island as our young people. And so we want to make sure their voice, their perspective gets taken into account as we go forward with our fall seminar series. So we want to contribute to the state of Rhode Island. We want to enhance whatever the state's capabilities are. And we want to be positioned so our students could learn from this experience, so they're stronger, better for it, rather than feeling a victim to it and helpless in it. We want to use this very difficult, extremely difficult situation and use it as much as possible for a learning engagement and advancing the future for our students and helping the state be as strong as possible position for the future. So John, I'm going to turn it back to you because I want to thank you. I look forward to collaborating with you as a faculty member of Bryant. And this has been a great opportunity, Dale and Lori and Scott, to meet you a little bit. And I look forward to meeting you all in person Edinaldo, I'm sure I'll see you quite a bit on campus, and I look forward to collaborating with you and other faculty at the university when I start as president July 1st. So thank you, John, and I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Gittell. And I also want to thank our panelists, Scott Jensen, Dr. Eddie Tebaldi, Lori White, Dale Fencherini. Nice job. Also, thank you very much to the audience for participating. Just a couple of reminders. The recordings of all 3 panel discussions are available or will soon be available at news.bryant.edu. Once again, they're at news.bryant.edu. And please look for details on that website for the continuing Zoom panel discussions that Dr. Gittell just mentioned on. That'll happen in the fall. And the tentative title for those panels are Recovering from the Pandemic, Strategies for Getting Back to Work and to a Better Future. In closing, we hope you have found these discussions valuable as you navigate the challenges and the months ahead. And please stay safe, healthy, and optimistic. Thank you again very much.